Welcome everybody to our workshop on shapes, symbols, and systems, how visual shorthand helps us work, grow, and live. I am your presenter, Reggie Holmes. This is our November 2021 Luncheon Lab, and I've been doing these for several months in a row now. And it's just a great way to bring my network together, present different topics that are focused on branding, marketing, design. We just have some great conversations. I like to call them a lab because a lot of times we'll have some exercises that people get a chance to kind of work through and as we present different topics and problems and solutions. So I like to get as much engagement and interaction as possible. We've got a lot to get to today, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone that's here. We will just breeze through this information, and if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat or hold them to the end. We'll have a little time, hopefully, for Q&A at the end and for open discussion. And there's also periods throughout the presentation where you'll have a chance to unmute and chime in or just drop answers to questions in the chat. So I want to encourage you all to do that. Also, feel free to put your business contact information in the chat as well and save that if you want to network and follow up with other people that attended today. I'm grateful you all can be here, and we'll go ahead and jump into the content. So I am your presenter. I'm Reggie Holmes. Founder, creative director of Enthuse Creative. We have been in business for about 8 years next month with a focus on brand strategy and graphic design. My background's in graphic design, so I approach this topic of shapes and symbols. It's very interesting to me, and it has always been something that I've been intrigued about. My favorite math subject was geometry. That's the one that I did the best in because it had to do with shapes. And so I was always interested in that, and not much of a mathematician, but that was the closest sort of symmetry between design, art, and the math side of the brain. So that's a little bit about me. I help people with their professional and personal brands. And I'm a visual creative person. So this topic is just something I've always been interested in, and kind of how shapes and symbols and the systems that we make from them all tie together. So I thought this would be fun, just to kind of way to get to know each other. You can feel free to drop your answer in the chat, but for you, which of these following symbols, and these emojis are symbols that are, within the last 20 years or so, I would say, as we've expanded more into technology, this is a key way that people communicate how they feel and how circumstances and situations are for them. So feel free to drop in the chat which one of these symbols, these emojis, sort of describe how your week has been as we're halfway through the last work day of the week on this Friday. So think about that, and you can drop your answer in there. Hopefully it's not the second one. So moving on. What are our objectives today? I like to always say, what I hope to get out of our time together. Again, I realize that you have a lot that you could be doing with your lunch hour on Friday, but you chose to be here. So I do want you to get some value out of the information that we share. So today we're going to investigate the power and meaning of shapes and symbols and how they're used to create visual systems. We're also going to explore how these elements are used throughout all areas of life. We're obviously going to touch on branding specifically, but what I hope you take away is that shapes and symbols and systems are all throughout the world around us, and they're used to help us understand, simplify, clarify, and improve the world that we live in. And so these are things that we often take for granted. And my goal and hope is that through our discussion, how we use these different things, we'll have a greater appreciation for them. So there was a man, Kenneth Burke, who was a 20th century theorist and critic. He had this to say about symbols. He said, humans are a symbol using, symbol making, and symbol misusing animal, which is a very thought-provoking, eye-opening quote. But I think it's really true in a lot of ways. We are always using symbols, we're always making symbols, and oftentimes misusing them, depending on what we're using them for. But it speaks to this idea that we have always created symbols as humans. We will continue to invent symbols. We will continue to repurpose symbols, specifically visual symbols. There are other types, but this is something that is a hallmark of human existence. It kind of always has been and always will be. So there are obviously logos for big brands, the types of symbols that we all know and recognize. Symbols are very powerful. They can offer hope, they can offend, they can instruct, inspire, or incite. You know, these are symbols that can keep you or your loved ones alive, depending on the situation. So symbols and shapes, they warn, they get us in places of safety, they keep us out of places of trouble. And they're even used to convey meanings, to motivate, to give spirit to movements, and even new technologies. So ideologies, technologies, all the things that we build and construct in this life as humans, symbols are a part of it. They make us participants in society and civilization and the marketplace. And so it's to our benefit to learn as much as we can about shapes and symbols, as simple as they are, and how to use them and how to use them better. So that's really what we hope to accomplish today. So we want to look just for briefly at the definitions. I feel like most of us know what shapes and symbols are, even if we don't know, the formal definition of it. But this always just sort of helps to give us the same sort of language that we're using. But a shape is a form of an object or its external boundary, outline, or external surface. So, we know what a circle is. We understand what circles represent, as well as, hearts. Heart is a physical part of our body, but it's also a shape. And we have become very familiar and aware of that shape over time through use from a very early age for most of us. So, shapes are the building blocks of symbols, and as we'll see, they play a very important role in terms of how we understand them and use them in everyday life. A symbol is a visual mark that a group of people understand to represent something else. So that's the formal definition of it. Symbols come in many different shapes, sizes, representations. And these are things that are a key factor in terms of how we live life, how we understand life. And so just a word on the difference between signs and symbols. A sign exists only to convey meaning, nothing more. But a symbol, on the other hand, exists in its own right, not just as a conveyor of meaning. So a symbol is something, but it also means something unique. So it's not just what it means, it's something that exists kind of in a different realm outside of just what it is. For example, a red octagon is a red octagon, but it means stop. And that's, almost universal if you kind of look at stop signs throughout the world. And so that's a symbol that's kind of gained universal adoption. And it exists as a red octagon, but we have come to understand it to mean stop, or to convey, don't go past this point or something like that. So that's an example of the difference between, a sign and a symbol. And this man, Carl Jung, was a philosopher and writer, and he had this quote: what we call a symbol is a term, a name, or even a picture that may be familiar in daily life, yet possesses specific connotations in addition to its conventional and obvious meaning. Thus, a word or an image is symbolic when it implies something more than its obvious and immediate meaning, kind of what I alluded to with respect to the octagon, and specifically a red octagon. So think about, even with that quote, what are some things that are one thing, but mean something completely different in another context? Thinking even about, the red circle that was on the previous page. You put that red circle on a white flag, and all of a sudden it represents a nation. It's not just a red circle. So that happens a lot when you start to talk about symbols and what they mean. The context definitely contributes to the connotation. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we start to think about symbols that we use, that we might want to build or employ for a different purpose in the future. So a system, here's sort of my definition. It's a collection of connected visual touch points that convey related ideas and concepts and form a complex yet coherent representation of something greater. So that can be a language, it can be a community, a brand for a business, etc. So it's really the idea that you have several symbols put together that are speaking a language and creating, speaking to something bigger. And the best example, or one of the best examples that I could think of from early in life was a periodic table. So each of these symbols, these groupings of letters, arranged in this sort of color-coded, organized, structured format. This is a language. There's a whole body of understanding that comes along with the periodic table. When you start to put these elements together in this format, it means something a lot bigger than any one of these things just sort of individually by itself. For example, the letter H for hydrogen, H can mean any of a number of things. You put this H on a blue sign, it means hospital. But you put this H within this periodic table format, all of a sudden it's a whole system speaking to all the different elements that are present in the natural world. So this is an example of systems, and we do this throughout life as humans, as a way to sort of organize our thoughts and organize our understanding. So that's just one example. Again, I'm not much of a scientist, but I do remember the periodic table. At one point, I may have known, a majority of these. It escapes me now, but that's one example. So it's hard to talk about symbols and systems and all these things without looking back into history, because again, our use of symbols, our use of shapes is not something new. It's not something that just happened in the modern world. We've been doing this for as long as people have been around, and time and again throughout history, throughout all the different, major movements, we've gone back to shapes and symbols and making systems out of them. That's just what we do as humans. So here's a little high level historical survey to sort of illustrate what I'm saying. So there are these caves in Europe, and there's symbols written on the walls, and there's I believe it's 32 of these symbols that appear time and again. And so someone has cataloged them and organized them, given them names, but it appears to be some kind of system. These are the symbols that they see in different caves, in different places. And so, you know, this is several thousand years ago. It escapes me, but prehistoric times. So we don't know what they were communicating, but clearly there was some type of communication going on through these symbols. Another example is Egyptian hieroglyphics. So it's a system of language and communication of ideas through these picture symbols. And, you know, we've been able to go back and figure out what was being written, what was being communicated on tablets and walls through the use of this pictorial system of symbols. So it's all very fascinating. Throughout different cultures, you find whether it's the spoken language in written form or pictures, shapes, people have sought to communicate their language through shapes and symbols. What about in medieval times? This is a coat of arms. And so areas and families would have coats of arms that represented, you know, who was part of the lineage and who wasn't. And this is from a place called Aachen. And this is, you know, what it looked like in medieval times. I think this is from the 15th century, and this is sort of a modern rendering. But you see, it hasn't changed a whole lot. And so people would identify who they were, who they served under, what land they came from through these graphical symbols. And so, you know, think about what might be an example of that today, where you have a symbol that sort of shows where you're from, what group of people you belong to. People have always sought to identify and be identified, and we've used symbols as a shorthand way of doing that. So what about before, you know, the times when commercial brands existed? Well, you know, we get that word brand from this idea of branding cattle, branding livestock, which was a way of communicating ownership. Okay, these are my livestock, and distinguishing that from someone else. So these unique symbols were created and burned into the flesh of these animals to be able to communicate that they belonged, you know, to a certain ranch, to a certain you know, area, and so that's one way that symbols were repurposed in that agrarian, you know, livestock based world of the early part of our history in this country. What about when we started to build things and we became more of an industrial sort of place? The Ford Motor Company, okay, that's probably the oldest, most well-known, well-established automotive type of company. And so this is sort of showing the symbol that they chose as their, you know, brand identifier. And as we started to mass produce products, you know, instead of people just going to the shopkeeper, they would look for these shorthand sort of symbols to represent the brands that they liked and consumed a lot. And so Ford, as you can see, once they sort of got a few years in, they had a lot of different change to their identifiers, you know, in the first 15 or so years. But around 1917, they sort of settled on something that they've essentially kind of stuck with. And it's changed a little bit here and there, but the basic idea of Ford and their visual symbol identifier has remained the same in a lot of ways for almost 100 years. So, which is pretty impressive. They've obviously changed a lot from the Model Ts that they used to build. They're, you know, focusing heavily on electric vehicles and things like that now. So the technology of building cars has changed, but this symbol has been a powerful tool to be able to harken back to this older time, while keeping, you know, the Ford name and identity fresh in people's minds for a newer generation. So that's an example. This summer I had a chance to go to Las Vegas. We stayed at the MGM Grand, and you go in there and there's this oversized sculpture of a lion. And so they started out as a media movie production company. They obviously have resorts, they have hotels, they are into sports and gaming. They do a lot of different things now, but they've retained the use of that lion as their key identifier. So the lion's obviously a natural, an animal, a natural reference, but there's something about that they clung to, and it continues to be used as an identifier for that company, even though they've come a long way from just MGM, you know, making movies. So I just want you to be able to see that as brands have evolved, if you have a really great symbol that means a lot to the company and to the people that are stakeholders in the company, a lot of times that will in some way be retained over time. So the symbols, shapes, these things are constant communicators. They communicate significance and value. You know, you think about Ford, there's value in that brand. If it wasn't, they have had 100 years to change it and do something different. But it's valuable, it's meaningful. So that's created when we use these symbols. Connection and association. You know, people associate something with a lion. That's why MGM found it profitable to use it in the 20s. That's why they're, you know, using it in the 2020s, as well as the 1920s. So we make connection and association with symbols. So they have value in that way. And then also translatability and permanence. So the idea that our brand can change and evolve, we can create totally different products, different services, but that symbol is what is always going to call people back to, you know, this thing that we started with, this basic idea or this value that our founders had and believed in. So in all these ways, we see how important symbolism can be. And, you know, the reality is our brains like shapes and symbols. You know, I put this puzzle piece here and these letter blocks here. Almost all of us are familiar with playing with those as a kid. And, you know, at a very early age, our brains love the ideas of shapes and symbols, and these things could be connected together. And I could put these blocks together to, I could stack them. I could make different words and different number combinations. And so we love these from a neurological standpoint, because it helps us to make complex ideas really simple. Our luncheon lab last month was about how our brains respond to branding, and our brains respond in a similar way to shapes and symbols. We like to work from simple to complex. And so this is a shorthand that gives our brain something simple to gravitate toward. And, you know, it takes more time, more energy to deal with a complex idea. But if I can break it down to something simple, like a shape, that's a color, a symbol that my brain can latch on to. Our brains like that. It helps us to record those patterns and to assign meaning. And our brains are always assigning meaning, particularly with visual patterns. And if you think about sort of primal man, it's just really a survival mechanism. If I can look into the sky, and know that a certain star in a certain place is a certain direction, for example, or that if I'm in the woods and a certain type of leaf means a tree that I can eat or a tree that is poisonous, our brains love that kind of information. And so we gravitate toward these shapes and symbols because they help us to give meaning and to make meaning out of these types of things. And again, familiarity and association. Our brains love these types of things. So like every other type of mode of communication, when it comes to shapes and symbols and systems, in order for them to work, you have to consider the audience and the environment. So those things need to be appropriate for that. And then as a consumer, when certain colors and shapes and symbols are used, or when they're juxtaposed together, you should be asking yourself, why was that choice made? Because somebody made a choice to put that color with that color, or that shape with that shape, or that symbol, with that particular orientation. Maybe they turned it on its side or turned it upside down, right? Why is it that a triangle, pointed to the right means play, or, it kind of represents play, whether it's music or video. Whereas a triangle that is oriented where it's, pointed more in an upward direction, why is that used with a lot of religious institutions, for example? So those are types of things that, you just want you to think about those things and think about why those decisions were made. If you are a designer or creative, those types of considerations will make you better at your craft. So ask yourself, what does the brand or the entity, what do they want to produce in terms of the way I think and also the way I feel? Because we use these shapes and symbols to create feeling as well. So we'll talk about shapes. That's our first thing, and then we'll hit on symbols and systems. So shapes are building blocks for symbol building and for brand design, and they have important meanings and associations that are reinforced throughout time. We think about, again, what I said about how we grew up with shapes, and there were some of the first things that we learned. We could identify the blue circle and the red triangle and the green square from an early age, maybe before we could talk. So it's kind of rooted in us, and one of the first things that we learn. Shapes convey meaning, and there's lots written out there about what different shapes mean, sort of at a high level. Flat edge, straight, represent stability and strength. Okay. I mentioned the triangle. The fact that it sort of points up from a solid base kind of represents stability and strength as well, but also hope and faith, kind of this idea of pointing up from the earth. Circles can tend to represent the earth and timelessness. I have on a wedding ring, and it is a circle. And part of the symbolism in that is that it's unending, representing my love for my wife and things like that. So, and then there are organic shapes that aren't these geometric shapes, but are kind of free form and have curves and things like that. And they sort of represent, they can represent living things, the natural world. spirals, curves, they represent water and waves and things like that. So, so think about, what these shapes mean when you see a logo, when you see some type of design using these different elements. What is it that's trying to be conveyed? So your turn. What shape do you encounter most commonly among the brands you use? Think about what's in your pantry. Think about what's in your closet in terms of the brands of clothes, maybe in your garage. What are the shapes that you see a lot among the brands that you use? So feel free to write that in the chat. I know that in my space, I think dealing with corporations, I do see a lot of circles, but I also see a lot of rectangles, and that kind of represents stability and business. And I think the idea of those flat edge shapes are, things that you can build with and build upon. And so the idea of building and particularly in urban environments, I see a lot of rectangles and squares. So so think about that. We'll continue on for the sake of time, but symbols are next. So shapes are the building block of symbols. And symbols are important. I'm sure most of you have heard about Facebook changing its name to Meta. And, shortly thereafter, there's a German company that said, hey, wait a minute, that looks familiar. We have that symbol. We're already using that. And so, there's a lawsuit, and I'm sure there'll be, if not litigation, a nice settlement. But, this symbol, kind of a stylized infinity symbol, is very common, right? Nobody really owns the infinity symbol. It could be, repurposed, but you can see it's very, very similar to MSense. And so, there's millions of dollars on the line with that decision. So don't let anybody ever tell you that, hey, symbols are not important, right? I think people that build brands, we know that, but lots of questions to be answered about that. But it just goes to show that when you're talking about multinational brands and big businesses, these symbols, it's not an afterthought, because you have to be very, very thoughtful in terms of what you use, how you use it, and what it means. So symbols can be a shortcut to trust. Brand builders strive to continually and consistently put the right symbols in the right place at the right time for the right audience. And this reinforces meaning. I think about some of these symbols, like we all know what this handshake sort of means and represents. If you see something with this United States, the official United States seal on it, if I get a letter to my house with that on it, I'm gonna open it, right? I'm not gonna say, oh, that's junk mail from the U.S. government. Like we know that that means something when it has that official seal on it. And then Jordan, right? Jordan is like one of the most popular brands out there. And certainly growing up, I didn't really have Jordans, but a lot of people did. And it was like very much a status symbol to have them. And so what you could not show up in was shoes that had a symbol that was like Jordan symbol, but not Jordan symbol, right? You were definitely going to be laughed at for that. So you had to have the actual Jordan brand Jumpman logo, which let everybody know that these were authentic. These were the real deal. And so, so in all those ways, the right symbol communicates trust that this is in fact what it claims to be. and it's believable. So that's kind of how symbols work. You know, logos are built on symbols. And this is the actual definition of logos here. We won't have to go into that, but you know, it can be abstract or figurative or include text. Sometimes it's not a whole word, it's just the symbol. And we'll look at some examples later, but let's see, make sure I didn't skip one. So here are some examples, very, very well-known logos that are built on symbols. We've got the golden arches. Think about being on the road, super hungry in the middle of nowhere. And, you may not even like fast food, but everybody knows what those lit up yellow arches mean and represent. Microsoft, it's a window. They obviously created Windows, but it's made up of 4 squares that make a window. And I'm sure those 4 squares represent something. But you see the window. You also, when it's in color, you see the colors. And then Starbucks, this one is very intricate. And there's a whole story. If you go back and look up the evolution of the Starbucks brand. But you can see just in this one color format, how many shapes kind of make up this circle. There's like 2 circles, one inside another. There's the star. There's these various wavy lines and other curves here. There's a lot going on in this image. And when you see it juxtaposed with the original logo, which is sort of a siren figure, you see this, you're like, wow, this is definitely better, but it's a much more evolved, very, very stylized version of that. So to see how it went from what it was, very literal, graphical representation to this image, it's quite a journey. It's very interesting. So I definitely encourage you to look at that. But just all these symbols kind of put together help to, build this logo. And so, logos are built that way, with people understanding shapes and symbols and putting them all together. What do they provide? Rapid and reliable recognition. I see that. I know what it is. I know sort of what it's about. Even if you don't eat at McDonald's, for example, just to use that example again, you know what they serve there. You know what sort of experience to expect there. And that's because of our familiarity with that symbol. They also help shape perception of the brand by becoming shorthand for the brand's best attributes over time. So we don't necessarily think about, when we see a very familiar brand, the worst parts of the brand. What the brand builder is trying to do is get you to think about the best parts of the brand. And so without having to spell it out every single time, they want our brains to call to mind the very best parts of that brand, whether it's their convenience, their customer service, their many options. I don't have it here, but if you think about the Amazon logo, for example, there's a line underneath the logo that goes from the A to the Z. And that symbol is an arrow, but it's also like a smiley face. And so all of these elements are in the Amazon logo, but it's meant to communicate. They have everything from A to Z, a positive customer service experience that's going to put a smile on your face. And it's fast. That arrow is kind of curved. It is meant to communicate. It's direct from them to you in a short amount of time. And so all of those things are what they want you to remember about Amazon, and it's reflected in that logo. Not every logo works on that level. It's primarily as an identifier, but it's a beautiful thing when a logo does work on that level. And if you see their prime trucks now, they're a different color. They're blue. Okay, they're not the Amazon, black and gold color scheme. And they just have the arrow on them. Like, that's prime. That's coming direct to you fast, and it's gonna put a smile on your face. And so now they might send you a box and it doesn't say Amazon, it just has that little arrow on it. You know who it came from, it got there fast. And that's what you want, right? That's the best part of that experience. That's all being communicated in that symbol. So what's a symbol that you can see in the room where you are right now, whether you're in your office or you're at your home? Really quickly, let's just have a couple people unmute and share a symbol that's in your line of sight right now.
Apple.
Yep. Anybody else?
I have a cylindrical mic in front of me.
Okay. Cylinder. Yeah. Anybody else? What am I looking at? I'm looking at, well, I have an apple too.
Triangle. Oh, it's my triangle.
There you go. Okay. So we got some good shapes and symbols there. They're all around us. Go back here. Pardon me. So lastly, systems. And this is what we're able to build if shapes are the building block for symbols, symbols are the building block for systems. And so this is an example of a system that we're all familiar with. And this is from the United States Department of Transportation website. These are just the warning symbols. These are some of the warning signs and symbols. So there are many. There's a whole page of them. But these are symbols that are if you're going to be on the road, they're vital to know, to be familiar with. There's some of these you may not have ever seen based on where you live, but there's a shape. We know that yellow diamond shape means warning sign. And we know, that we need to pay attention to the arrow or the line that is on that because it is something that I just need to be aware of for my own safety and the safety of others around me. So this is an example of how a system is built off of first getting people familiar with the idea of the yellow diamond shape, and then putting something on that, which is something that they need to pay attention to. It's got to be communicated quickly because people are going to be driving by it at different rates of speed. And so smart people came up with this concept, and we see it time and again, but this is just one example that we would all be familiar with. When we think about brand systems, there's a lot more involved than just the logo. The logo is sort of where things start, but it's definitely not where things end, particularly for modern brand. These are all the different things that need to be considered when you talk about building a brand system. It's really a collection of touch points, as we said earlier. And what's important to keep in mind is how they all work together. And the thing that I want you to think about also is how brand systems show up in different places. It used to be, you might see a brand point of sale in a store, or some type of billboard advertisement or something like that. But now, you're going to see a brand on the website. You might see it on your phone. You might see it on your laptop, your desktop. You might see it on a TV screen. You might see it. You might not even see it. You might just, hear it in a commercial or on your searching for something on your smart speaker or something like that. So there's all these different things that have to be considered when it comes to the brand system. Not just, how do you use the pictures on the website or in your marketing collateral, for example. So if you're building brands, These are all different types of things that you want to consider. So just a look at some brand systems. Google, we're all, familiar with Google. Recently, they updated their sort of related products to all kind of tie more closely into this color scheme that they use. It was sort of met with a little bit of excitement and also people weren't that excited about it because, it's kind of confusing. Like they all look similar. They all kind of have the same colors and shapes, but it's when you're used to looking at very different icons on a phone, I could quickly identify Google Docs, right? But now it takes me a little bit longer because they all kind of look the same. So their goal was to unify them. But in the short term, it kind of confused people. It led to less clarity and understanding of what was being presented because they look too similar, right? Like this is docs and this, is like meat. But at quick glance, without being familiar with it, they kind of look the same. Like I use these tools every day, so I've gotten more familiar with it. But at first it was like, hey, they all kind of seem the same, So I on one hand, I understand the goal. On the other hand, I think there's a way to sort of try to unify things too much that can, not be to the benefit of your customer. And if you're building a brand, the goal is to get it right for your customer. This is a company that is the largest company that deals with like animal health products. And so, here's their logo. And then what I wanted to show you is how they created these icons that tie into the logo. So they very much fit the brand identity. And there's some uniqueness to them. But the point is that they've created an icon system that fits the brand. And so if you're thinking about building a brand in today's world, this is hugely important because again, people might go to your website on your phone. And so, you can't just have generic looking icons that don't really fit your brand. What we're finding is that people want to create some customized icon, like that's extending the brand further and really getting the most value out of systems that you might create for your business. So, what's the significance of brand systems? Clarity. Both internal and external stakeholders know how to communicate the brand, what it stands for, and how it should show up. So, again, in a digital world where a lot of people are coming to the brand from different places in different formats, having that clarity is hugely important. Consistency, making sure that your brand values, your image, and your messaging are the same across different channels. And people not only appreciate consistency, it's been shown to increase revenue up to 33%. So when people can clearly find you and are confident in the way you're presenting yourself on different channels, it can lead to more revenue. So that's just something to keep in mind, the importance of consistency. And then the third C of the 3 C's is collaboration. So as more and more people engage with and interact with your brand, you can ensure that there's some integrity in how your brand is used. We talked about how symbols are tools that can be used. You want to make sure that people are using the tool in the right way and understanding that a lot of people are going to see your brand. A lot of people are going to take part in it in some way. And so as people share ideas, as people share in the brand, share communications about the brand, having a system in place allows everyone to sort of do that and be on the same page, which is going to be valuable. So quick case study. There's CocaCola Real Magic brand campaign. This is something that they decided to do recently, is roll out this new sort of representation of the Coca-Cola brand, which is obviously world-renowned, one of the most well-regarded, well-recognized brands in the world. They wanted to kind of leverage the historical recognition of, Coca-Cola's symbols and identifiers, but kind of use them in a different way to appeal to a newer, fresher audience, and really connected around the idea of magic moments, right? They know the environment that we've all been in the last several months. And so the idea is that, hey, a Coca-Cola among friends can create real magic and bring people together for some special moments. And so, this is, they've got their color. Everybody knows that Coca-Cola red color, their word mark, again, which most people know and are really familiar with. And then this bottle shape, which is another part of their intellectual property that they've leveraged successfully over the years. So they bring all those things together and kind of reimagine their brand. They kind of change the shape of it. So it's like the Coca-Cola word mark is wrapping around a bottle that's not there. As you would see it on an actual bottle, but it's just kind of been rendered that way. It's so familiar that, we know what it is just by the different swoops and curves of the logo. We don't even need to see it, with a bottle per se. We know that that's Coke. And when you throw in the color and sort of the shape that it's alluded to, but is not there, it's really clever how they use all these different symbols in a unique way. And that's what we see a lot is that, Starbucks, that logo that I showed you, it used to say Starbucks coffee. And then eventually they took away coffee because everybody knows what it is to be Starbucks. They know what that's about. The experience of that brand is widespread enough. And eventually, you get a cup now, they don't even have Starbucks on it. Like they just have that woman in the green circle, what it is you're drinking, what that experience is about. So as brands mature and evolve and become more and more part of the culture, they can take more liberty with their symbols and with that intellectual property that they've created. So this is a great sort of modern example of a historical legacy brand that's looking for ways to leverage that history, but also do new and interesting things. And with this campaign, they brought together artists and creatives from all over the world to just create different imaginings of what real magic is and looks like. So you can go look that up on your own time. Just some final considerations. Carefully consider everywhere your brand needs to show up. We talked a lot about the digital world, but maybe you're still showing up in print, showing up in, tangible physical space or even point of sale, within a store. So think about how you can leverage this idea of symbols and shapes to create that recognition that easily identifies you and creates that familiarity and association for people. If you don't have brand style guidelines, consider how you can develop them and use them, because again, that will allow you to maintain that consistency, that clarity of brand, and then also control, because you'll have to give your brand to different people and it'll appear different places. You want to make sure that it maintains its integrity no matter where it shows up. And then lastly, protect the IP you create. If you have a unique symbol, get that trademark protected so that, it won't be, you won't have a Facebook Meta situation going on. And then also that creates value for your business as well. So if you need to connect with intellectual property attorneys to pursue that, please let me know. I can connect you. So that's it, folks. Our next Luncheon Lab will be on 12/17. We don't have a topic yet, but it'll definitely be related to branding and planning for your business. This is my information here. Enthuse Creative on